Hi, everybody, and welcome to another brand new episode of Back to Basics. We haven't seen you in a whole week, but we are just continuing from where we left off. So it's been a whole of, 2 minutes since we finished recording the last episode. Yay, isn't internet stuff great? As usual, I am the same corona-bound Pastor Don I always am, and with me is the wonderful, the magnificent, the heavy eyelashed Courtney.
Thank you. Hello. I've somehow still not got it. I'm kind of afraid of when it eventually happens.
Yeah, it is. It's not fun. Like, I haven't had it myself, thank God, but it's currently ravaging my household. I've known people who've had it. It's an experience, and it's not a good one. My wife and daughter are upstairs suffering through it right now, and I do not envy them that.
Well, I hope they get through it quickly.
Yeah. I pray for them. I love them, and I look forward to the day where they can come downstairs and I can have my bed back. In the meantime, today we are going to be doing a wonderful twofer. We're going to get Genesis chapters 10 and 11 out of the way. Now, as a fun spoiler for everybody, Genesis chapter 10 and the back half of chapter 11 are all just a list of genealogies, more begats. So if you want to know why begats are important and why we have them in the Bible, we talked about them in a previous video. So go back early on. We're talking about begats back then. Today,
just watch all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Just watch all of them. It's good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. You can go back there and do that. We are not going to even bother reading the begats today because it literally is just the genealogy of nations built up from Noah leading into chapter 11. And then leading out from the Tower of Babel, which is what we're going to be talking about for the most part today, we've got another genealogy that connects us to Abram, which is where we're going to start in our next episode. So I'm not actually going to read chapter 10. If you want to read chapter 10, I suggest you do so. It's not exactly the most exciting reading here. It's the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all the children born after the flood. And it gets us all the way down to basically every community that lived in that area of the ancient Middle East. That being the theory that they all came from Noah. So that's what happens there. And then we kick ourselves over to Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, which is the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, I'll go ahead and read that. It's a short passage, but it should give us a little bit to talk about. All right, Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there so that they will not understand one another's speech." The Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. All right.
Why?
Right?
That screams to me of like, my child is doing better than I want them to, so I'm going to like put unnecessary roadblocks in their way. Like, why?
Yeah. Now first off, there's a lot to be said about this. First off is the fact that there's no characters in the story, right? Like it's all generalities, which tells us that this is a mythological story and not necessarily an historical story. Literarily speaking, the most likely choice here is that this is a small chunk of text inserted into the histories of the people to explain why does not everybody speak the same language.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really it.
It answers one of those big questions that kids ask and grown-ups don't have a good answer for. And there, now this is the answer for everybody.
Exactly. You know, it's standardized testing, just, you know, in the ancient world. But
Works just as well.
like where that explanation gets a little bit complicated is that within the field of linguistics, the theory of linguistic monogenesis, that is the theory of a single language origin, still carries some weight. Like, it's actually generally understood that languages, we can't trace them all the way back to a single root language. But as we go back in time, we go from the many languages we have to just larger and larger families of proto-languages as they're coming closer and closer together. We haven't found any record of an original language, but it's not that far of a stretch to assume that there probably was one at some point. So that does throw a kink into this being entirely ahistorical. That's not to say that, you know, this is a case of God coming down and saying, well, screw these guys, they might actually get up here someday. Because I don't think that's what's happening here at all.
It sounds to me more like a piece of the narrative happening to match a piece of likely reality. You know, like it is a fairly simple and straightforward story to go. Once upon a time, we all spoke the same language and we got a whole lot accomplished. And God was like, you're moving too fast. I'm going to make it so you all speak different languages. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Like, that's a fairly straightforward, easy to come up with story.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm being very dismissive here, and that's not really, I'm not meaning to disparage culture or anything here, but
that's a good place to start, because like, in a minute, we'll get into some of the more far-fetched sort of underpinning ideas here. But on the whole, like, this really is a story that you kind of should dismiss, because there's not a whole lot to be taken from it. It's not a huge piece of our history. And strictly speaking, it's not hugely relevant to the larger story. It is, in effect, a literary solution to why are there languages, and that's all that it really serves here in the text. That being said, be dismissive about it, sure, like that's a perfectly legit reading. That being said, I've always found this one of my favorite ones to think over, just because of the narrative options it gives us in terms of the history of our people, the human race, via this particular tribe, because it is specific about the city and its location and what was happening there in a way that isn't necessary for a mythological story. So like, if they're saying once there was a city, people came together, we built a tower, God said nuts to that, and then suddenly there were languages, that'd be fine. But like, there's a specific migratory pattern from the east. They came upon the plain of Shinar, which is a real place. They built a city there. The city was called Babel for the specific reason. Like, there are certain specifics there that are not necessary, particularly for a mythological story of that nature. So that does suggest to me that there is some sort of back in the spoken proto-history, that there is some kind of story at the heart of this.
Something that's sort of bothering me as I think through the stuff that we've talked about, and as we're getting through just like the earliest parts of the Old Testament, there seems to be this recurrent theme of God coming off like a really toxic parent, where it's a lot of, you know, like just smacking the kid back down when they try and reach and learn and do for themselves.
Yeah. Now, I'm not even going to begin to say that I know what's going on with this interaction between God and humankind here. Like, I don't. Because first off, as modern readers of the text who are deconstructing this, we're assuming this isn't actually an interaction. This is God being used as kind of a puppet straw man for kids who want to know where languages come from. And seeing as we're dealing with an ancient society, most of the parents in those days were toxic parents. So it kind of stands to reason that a lot of that same sort of stuff would carry over into how they describe God. So that is, of course, our most logical explanation for why is God being a dick here and a terrible parent? Because most parents were kind of a dick and terrible parents in those days anyway. And this was a story for kids by parents to explain something. There's your answer. However, let's take it. Let's be evangelical here for a moment. Take it a little more literally and pry it apart.
It's just painting God in a really unfortunate light.
It is. It is. But it wasn't unfortunate to the people at the time. And again, this is all contextual. Like, we don't understand God that way, but they did in those days because, well, that's how people were. So we can take it as historical, but it doesn't necessarily mean it informs our understanding of how God actually is. It just informs our understanding of how people understood God then. Now, that said, I have always been the weirdo, the sci-fi loving, super geeky weirdo, who always wondered, what in the name of actual God were they doing in Babel here?
Oh yeah, why just building it? Well, that doesn't seem that complicated to me too. Again, you give humans seem to be treated like children in this part of the Bible because as a species we were. If you give a kid a big, huge box of like Legos or whatever, what's the first thing they're gonna do? See how tall of a tower they can build.
Right. Now, when I was in, I think it was middle school when I was reading this, the logic that I wrestled with was, God says, let's mess them up because, like, if they can do this, they're going to like be a problem later. And at the time, they were trying to build a tower that gets up to the heavens. So I figured, my understanding as a school kid was, oh, well, like, God doesn't want humans to be able to have a tower that reaches all the way up to where God is. So God's decided to mess this up before it happens. Except for one thing, like, a brick and mortar tower would never have ever had a chance to do that because that's not how physics works. You can make that tower you could make that tower a space elevator that runs to the moon and beyond. You're never going to get to God because God doesn't physically exist within our time-space bubble. So there's a logic error there that used to always bug me. And for myself at that time, as for a lot of people, this passage is fundamental for the belief in ancient advanced civilizations in our history. The idea that there was a time in human history where civilization was more advanced than it is now, and it's since been wiped out. Nothing in the text, of course, that speaks to that, but it's fun to think about nonetheless. So maybe
it's an interesting thought, which is I feel like what a lot of this leads into.
Yeah.
But it's difficult when you're this is maybe the first time that I brought this up. It's quickly sort of coming around to me where it's like, why is any of I know why these would be kept around, like within Judaism. That makes sense. It's all very cultural and historical, and it's not even ours. Why is this stuff all in the Christian Bible?
Because it is, in a way, ours too. The Christian story is a continuation of the Jewish story in a different direction. So we still view all of this stuff as our, and I'm using the term fairly broadly here, history. Now, it's not, as it is with modern Jews, this is a racial and cultural history. Something that is very personal, very unique to them in that way, which is why when we talk about this in broader terms beyond the Christian understanding, I'm always hesitant to make any sort of universal claims. I'm happy to talk about what this history means to us as Christians in the sense that it's a part of our journey. But that is a narrow understanding, and I want to be clear to anybody reading this as a Christian, that is the narrow understanding we have of this as it informs our journey. It's not just ours, and we are adoptees into the larger Jewish family in that way. So that's an important part for us to understand.
It would be really nice at some point, like, let us know, hit us up in the Discord or whatever. I personally think it would be really nice to actually get a Jewish perspective on some of these things.
Yeah.
Granted, that's not what the purpose of the series is, but like I think it would be really interesting at the very least, and maybe a nice opportunity for cultural exchange between different religions,
Yeah. All right. So
here's hoping.
Yeah, exactly. Here's hoping. So beyond that point, there's not a lot that we can say about this other than this is one of those cases where, yeah, there's clearly like there was at some point probably a city of Babel in the plain of Shinar. We have no idea what actually happened to it. I'm pretty sure it wasn't spontaneous language diversion. In fact, if I had to venture a guess, the Shinarian city Babel was probably a place that existed during that longer than the Bible suggests stretch between Noah and the first Mediterranean cities. It was probably a city that happened during that probably several millennia long period. And it was probably one of the larger cities. It was probably one where a lot of people came together. And because of, time, it was probably a place where the general language of the period diverged differently in different places, kind of like Mandarin and Cantonese split over time. And like, it was a place where everybody was, but we started to see language diversion, and then eventually it broke up because not everybody was speaking the same language in the way that nations often do over a long enough history. Because again, we don't know in chapter 10 how long that period of time actually was between the flood and the rise of the first cities, and then eventually to Abram, which we're going to get in the next chapter. That period of time could have been 500 years. It could have been 5,000 years. We could have been 10,000. We don't know, no, because the Bible's not meant to be historical in that way. But if we're assuming the flood is an historical event, and if we're assuming that Babel is to some degree an historical event, we don't know where in the timeline that falls, and we're never gonna know that. So basically, my assumption is that it was a city where languages probably diverged. It was probably the capital of whatever the region was, and eventually people moved on from it. And so that's pretty much, I think, all we got to tear into this one today. So I think we'll go a little short today.
Yeah, and then there's just a whole big pile of more begats after that.
Yep. Verses 10 to 32 are all more begats that lead us from Shem all the way up to Abram, which is where we're going to start next week. So that being the case, I'm not going to read that either. You want to go check out the rest of Genesis chapter 11. I highly recommend it. In the meantime,
like, share, and subscribe.
Every day, every time. If you don't mind, it is super helpful. In the meantime, like I said before, lots of stuff happening on Discord. If you're in Japan, you can come join us at the actual physical church that we have here. All of the information is listed below in the description. And if, again, you're on the podcast and you don't see me gesturing, it's still in the description. You heard me say that. I'm pretty sure you can guess. Otherwise, I want to wish you guys a really good week. I hope you have less corona in your life than I do today. I pray that you are healthy, that you're happy, that your children are well behaved, and that you get enough sleep, because I'm not getting any of those. So go ahead, take care, have a good one. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.